Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sports Annotated. I'm Michael Miller, and I'm an editor at Bookforum magazine. And tonight's event is an offshoot of Bookforum's summer issue, in which we invited some of our favorite writers to write about sports, about the mythologies we project onto players and teams, about social justice, and about what it means to be a fan, and also about the joy of playing and watching sports. This event is part of the Brooklyn Book Festival's Bookend series, and we want to thank the organizers of the festival for having us. And we have a really exciting and inspired group of panelists this evening. So I'm going to get right into the introductions and then turn it over to our moderator, Thomas Beller. At the end, we will have time for some questions from the audience, so please put your questions in the Zoom chat. Thomas Beller has written for many publications, including The New Yorker, N+1, and Bookforum. He was a founding editor at Open City Magazine and the creator of Mr. Beller's Neighborhood. His books include J.D. Salinger, The Escape Artist, How to Be a Man, and the forthcoming Lost in the Game, a book about basketball, which will be published by Duke University Press in November. Lindsay Zoladz is a freelance critic, reporter, and essayist living in Brooklyn. She's a frequent contributor to the New York Times, Bookforum, and other publications, and is currently working on a book about female geniuses. Her piece for Bookforum's summer issue is about her transformation into a Mets fan after losing faith in her childhood baseball team, the Phillies. Ross Gay is the author of 4 books of poetry, including 2020's Beholding, which is the winner of the Penn Gene Stein Book Award. His new collection of essays, Inciting Joy, will be released this month by Algonquin Books. In the summer issue, Ross wrote a sort of diaristic piece detailing observations he's made about writing poetry, collaboration, and aggression while playing basketball. Miranda Popkey is the author of the 2020 novel Topics of Conversation, published by Knopf. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Paris Review Daily, and the New Yorker, among other outlets. She writes about sports and movies for Fran magazine. And for the sports issue, she wrote an appreciation of the Boston Celtics guard, Marcus Smart. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to this evening's moderator, Thomas Beller. Thank you very much.
Hello. I feel we should all, one at a time, come out from behind the curtain. There we go. Hello, Lindsay. Hello, Miranda. Hello, Ross. So when I first heard that Bookforum had gathered an issue around sports, I was expecting or sort of bracing for all kinds of rather cutting edge preoccupations, because there's so many ways that sports intersects with sort of the breaking moment of the culture and the culture disputes, let's say, to just tweak that phrase. But one thing that I was struck about the pieces that the three of you put together were, in one way or the other, they all harkened back to childhood and were very childhood centric, and thought that was interesting. Maybe least of all the Marcus Smart piece, but I feel that Marcus Smart embodies, I can't decide if Marcus Smart embodies something that is boyish himself, or if he embodies qualities that young boys particularly value. But I was kind of intrigued to see this theme appear, and I wanted to just put that out there as some connective tissue among the three of us. To start, I have a very specific question for Ross. And it comes from the book of the poetry. It's not even really a collection, the long poem that is essentially a homage to basketball. And it involves a comment about a basketball court and a kind of extinction of basketball courts in the face of, for lack of a better word, gentrification, and how basketball courts are the scenes of playgrounds we're talking about, of a sort of rambunctiousness. I think the exact words were black laughter comes up. And this is a subject very close to my heart because I play pickup basketball a lot. I've just come rushing back from playing, and I'm very sensitive to what I like about it and what qualities I worry about, and the qualities that I worry about becoming extinct are qualities that I think would largely be considered negative qualities. Some kind of free-floating belligerence, animosity, threat, antisocial behavior, a place where you could be hurt or have your feelings hurt or be disrespected or abused in some way. And again, even though the three of you wrote very different pieces for Bookforum, the fact that there's some echo of childhood where these concerns are super paramount. And then as you get older, you may still find yourself, as I do, in that kind of economy, however strange. So I just wanted to throw those themes out there and begin with you, Ross, to just touch on that beat in your book and ask you to expand a little bit about it, this dialectic between neighborhood, community, positive things, and pickup basketball, playground basketball as an arena where maybe not such explicitly positive things are happening, even though they may be positive in their own way.
Yeah. First of all, I want to think, I would love to see Marcus Smart in a pickup game, like just his game, which, I mean, now he's got like a jump shot and stuff that's a little bit different, but that kid who played, I think where did he play, in Oklahoma, maybe?
Oklahoma State, I think.
Oklahoma State. God, I loved him. I loved him when he was a kid and he was like this tough little kid, and now he's who he is still, like really tough. But now like sort of this different kind of skilled kid. What I would say, I love that question, and I know you write beautifully about pickup courts. I was reading that piece of yours about courts in New York and that the kind of extinction in a way, or it seems like it can feel like the game is changing that way. Meaning going inside to like regulated spaces. And it's funny when you were saying like the kind of, I forget how you put it, but like the two sides of it, like there's this, what can feel like not great about it, and then there's what feels great about it. I almost don't even register what feels not great about it, because I feel like that's almost just like regular life in a way. But what I feel like is so crucial and remarkable, and actually like the sanctuary of a pickup court, is that it is a space that is moment by moment, depending on who's in the game. I mean, it's like a profoundly democratic space. And it's one of the very few actually profoundly democratic spaces that I've experienced in my life. And when I say democratic, I mean, every single time the configuration of people changes, which, depending on the court, it kind of does every game more or less, the rules to the game change. It's always a negotiation. So a foul, I was just talking about this yesterday, like a foul on some courts, a foul with some players is one thing, and a foul with different players is another thing. And it's not like there's not a uniform thing. There's not like if you're driving over 35 miles an hour, it's a ticket. It's like you might have to like punch someone in the face, some people, for them to call a foul. Some people, they call fouls too much. That can fuck up the game. The game itself has these mechanisms to regulate that, which might be like saying that's bullshit. It might be like taking the ball and, throwing it, or it might be like walking down to the other end of the court, which to me is just like, how do we be together without a cop, actually, without some kind of hierarchical, like a coach or a ref, which is where you learn how to do that on basketball courts. And I know that I came up playing basketball, and there were always like elders at the courts who were showing me how to be a person, in various ways, that I get to sort of decide which parts I get to carry on. But as I got older, I started to see like some of these elders who were like, in their 30s probably, loving these kids, just taking such dear care of them, which wasn't always like loving the way that you would get at the gym, where your parents are paying, $2,000 for, paying whatever that coach at the end of your one essay is talking about, like $80 an hour. It's not that kind of love. I think it's probably a more significant kind of love, actually. You know, I could go on forever about this, but I want to stop.
Well, no, that's very nice to hear you say. And I would like to just take this very inspirational framing of elders demonstrating, you know, if not how to be a man, just how to behave, and inject an incredible dose of negativity into this and that. I feel the same way in terms of examples being given, but the examples that I would think of are not so soulful and positive. I'm thinking about this just randomly from when I was a kid. This guy Ron, who seemed to be some former superstar with crazy knee pads. This is now like late 70s, and probably an alcoholic. And he's a ball hog. There's nothing worse than someone who used to be a superstar and take all the shots, who's no longer has those skills, but still demands that. And so he has to do it with being loud. This is just my desire, perversely, to make things a little sad. Let's go from this, because we have, if sadness is going to be the next beat, we can kind of go into two directions. I wanted to talk about Marcus Smart just as a extension. So let's just do that, because the idea of you know, being good, being bad, playing well, playing poorly, the strange way that those things shift back and forth very quickly. As Marcus Smart is a curious example of this. And, you know, your piece is an appreciation. So I thought I'll just turn it to you, good and bad, and it's in their yin yang ways.
Yeah, it's, and first of all, I just want to say that it's so wonderful to be here with you, Thomas, and Lindsay and Ross, and thank you so much. But so I got into basketball very recently. I basically started watching basketball in a serious way during the bubble playoffs. So at some point, sort of late 2020. And I found watching basketball, I was able to experience joy, real joy and real pleasure. Yeah, and I was, you know, for reasons I think we can all remember, it was difficult to find those kinds of spaces and have that kind of experience. So I think one of the things that you may be gesturing towards, Thomas, is that Marcus Smart does not produce a lot of points necessarily. He doesn't. He may be known for flopping. That's one of the things that critics would say about him. Maybe has not been a traditional point guard in many ways. All this to say, like, when I started watching basketball, I didn't know any of this. I didn't know that he had that reputation. I didn't know that he was on some, you know, in some corners of the internet, in some fandoms, reviled for, you know, getting the call in an underhanded way, allegedly. And what I saw was just someone who was at every moment trying his very hardest with the skills that he had to play an incredibly challenging sport. And I was absolutely in awe of that. And I think that at his very best, he is able to, and I think of him a little bit as an underdog. I mean, he went 6th in the draft, so it's not like he's not someone who had respect coming out of college, and he did have a good reputation, and he's not so much of an underdog, but he doesn't have some of those traditional skills. And he just seems to want it more. And I love to see someone who is working within the limits of their body and the limits of their skills, and is able to turn those deficits into assets, essentially. And I think, you know, the moment I wrote about is one of those moments that is like, he's taking a shot he shouldn't take, but he makes it. And it's like the best and the worst of him together. But I think another moment from those playoffs that I actually was lucky enough to see in person, and that sometimes I rewatch when I'm sort of feeling down because it's such a beautiful moment, is that also I think is emblematic of him knowing exactly what his role is and him knowing exactly what he can contribute to a team is the very last play of the first game of the Net series, where they're like, I don't know, 10 seconds left on the clock, and the Celtics are down by 1, and Jaylen Brown brings the ball up the court, and it's like, is he going to take a shot? Because like he also sometimes he'll dribble into coverage and he'll lose the ball, and he's like, no, he makes the right decision, and he gets it over to Marcus, who's over on sort of in the corner spot on the left side of the court, and you're like, oh God, is Marcus Smart going to take a 3-pointer? And because that would be the worst. Like you could see him making that decision. Sometimes he makes that decision. He made that decision sometimes in later games in the playoffs. And I love him for it, but I didn't want him to make that decision. But no, it's like he knows that people are thinking that. So he fakes it. He holds the ball out, and then Tatum rolls and he gets the ball to Tatum, and Tatum spins off of Kyrie Irving and gets the ball, and time expires. And
the entire city of Boston has an orgasm at the same time.
I was there. I was in the very last row. I lost my mind. I was crying.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
But that's what he can do. It's like in that moment, he knows that you think you're going to take the shot. And he'd also earlier in the third quarter, he had gone on like a spree of just knocking down 3-pointer after 3-pointer after 3-pointer. And so I wouldn't have blamed him if he'd taken the shot, but in that moment, he made the exact right decision. And I think it was a little bit, not that he was maybe doing this consciously, but playing against whatever you might have thought he was going to do. And yeah, I think he is someone who is also, I don't know what happens in that locker room, but I would bet that he is like the emotional core of that team because he wants it more than anyone else. And I think being not the most talented player means that you have to want it. You maybe sometimes have to want it more because it's not coming easy to you.
I'm loving everything you're saying, and I just want to almost amplify one thing or one theme, which is you're talking about him playing to the limits of his physical capacity, but I would actually say he goes beyond. And one of the reasons he's sort of compelling is he's somewhere between like a black Evel Knievel and almost like a black Jesus or something. Like he's the suffering, you're talking about his limitations as a player offensively, but he's an insane athlete, and he's kind of an aristocrat of drawing the charge. Like he draws, I don't know the exact stat, but he's way up there and drawn charges. And that's a play that involves putting yourself in front of a very fast moving athletic person and letting them bang into you, and then you fall down. Yeah. And he does that over and over. So there's almost this feeling with him that like it's like being flagellated or something. Like how much pain can he endure?
And there's also like he rolled his ankle in this like incredibly, like you could hear, this was during the Bucks series, but he rolled his ankle and you could hear him, the on-court mics picked up his just agony. And then he came back, he went in the locker room and came back. Yeah. So no, absolutely. He puts his body on the line because he knows that is one of the ways in which he brings value to a team is his willingness to sacrifice himself physically.
Well, just briefly, but I want to touch on one other thing. And you just said the word bring value. Your piece did briefly engage in this strange subtext or subculture in sports that is true of all the professional sports, maybe especially in basketball, in which players are discussed in terms of value, and the value is to the team, but the value is also a transactional value that involves contracts, years left. And we used to talk about people being like a Monday morning quarterback or like a backseat sort of driver coach. Now everyone's a backseat general manager in which they're participating in these complicated projections of value, and was this a good contract and a bad contract? And you mentioned that he's someone whose value might be in his absence, that if we could get rid of him, we'd get something better. And that's, and yet the metrics one feels are not quite picking up everything that's the Evel Knievel Jesus thing.
I don't want to go too deeply into like what I think is happening in the Celtics locker room, especially right now. But
actually now is the time to go there, baby, because
I do think that there's something really special in terms of like the desire and Michael started this by saying like, part of this panel is like narratives that we're projecting. I'm projecting a lot of narratives onto this player. And maybe if Marcus Smart were like listening to me, he would be like, you've got this all wrong. And I want to definitely acknowledge that very real possibility. But to me, he's not the best scorer on the team. He's not the most talented athlete on the team, but he's the core of that team. And I think if you trade him away, you lose something that is impossible to quantify. I don't think the Boston Celtics like have a team. Like, I think that I would trade him last. I would lose Jason Tatum before I would lose Marcus Smart, because I think that he makes those, you know, depending on how many people are on the, like, you know, those 10 to 15, but especially like the core, whatever, 7-8 man rotation, like he makes that a team.
I want to take this idea of losing and make that the transition to the Mets and Lindsay's piece. Although before I go, I have to say, Miranda, I do hope that you can inject yourself into Boston sports media, because I think they need your voice. And B, I hope we get a photograph of you and Marcus Smart together for reasons that we'll discuss when we see the picture. But meanwhile, this idea of losing, winning, allegiances, we're switching over from basketball to baseball, but this is all what your piece, Lindsay, is wrapped up in. And I thought that could be a good way to kick it to you.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Miranda, when you were speaking, I've been thinking about the difference between the relationship to time that these two different sports we're talking about have. So, you know, and I think something that I loved about your piece is, and as you were just talking now, like there is this sense, you know, the cliche that the last minute of an NBA game takes 30 minutes to play out, especially in a playoff game. And there is this sense of like time slowing down and becoming elastic. And I think the best kind of writing about basketball, and even just like the analyzing, you know, these 10-second plays and kind of breaking it down into however many words, like there is something about the particular writing about that sport that, you know, and baseball's relationship to time is completely different. And we're looking at getting a pitch clock for pitchers next year, which is going to be a whole other thing to wax poetic about. But yeah, I mean, in terms of winning and losing, I think we were, you know, we've been discussing too, like this yin and yang of the good and the bad. And that is the New York Mets in a nutshell. Like somehow, even when they're good, which they are really good right now, and there is this constant anxiety that they're going to find a way to mess it up, because that's just what the Mets do. And I use the word Metsiness, the concept of Metsiness in my piece, which kind of is that in an essence of how can you be sort of bad and an underdog even when you're good, even when, you know, you're sort of the favorites this season, at least, to win the pennant, and still have that kind of lovable loser thing about you. And I think that is something that drew me to the New York Mets. I'm from the Philadelphia area, so I grew up rooting for Philly teams, and a sort of wrinkle that I would have needed like 10,000 more words to discuss this in my piece, but I am still a Sixers fan and an Eagles fan. So I have my allegiances split down. So while I can appreciate Marcus Smart in an abstract sense, my heart says,
we hate the fucking Celtics. Me too, I'm with you. Me too, I'm from there too. We hate them. Okay, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, oh, I hate them so much.
Love Marcus Smart, hate the Celtics.
Yeah, I mean, he's a compelling
team. We're a very hateable team. I get it. If I did not live in the Boston area, I get it.
And speaking of hateable teams, you know, Philadelphia sports fans as well. But I think, you know, in writing this piece, and that is sort of about me shedding that identity as a Phillies fan, and that connection to my childhood of, you know, having this sort of formative disappointment of watching the Phillies lose the World Series in 1993 when I was 7 years old, and really never getting over that. I think there is something about that feeling of losing, and that feeling of like really early disappointment, you know, going back to the idea of childhood that link, I think, these three pieces, you know, in some sense, like that was like my first heartbreak, you know, at 7 years old, of just like getting to see my team go to the World Series and then just watching them get creamed. There's something, and there is something that feels childlike and connected to that kind of like primal feeling when I'm still watching baseball, when I go into this like just baseball brain of, you know, we gotta win, we gotta do it, more than anything else. Like it makes me feel like a child again. And I think some of that too, I was thinking of this earlier when we were talking about the links to childhood. And I think it's, you know, baseball in particular, there's such a simplicity to it, and the rules are very easy to understand for the most part. I understood the game when I was 7 years old. You know, I could be watching this game and the language and the grammar of the game was like, made sense to me in a way that I can relate to now. And, you know, that's not the same with like the books I was reading when I was 7 versus today, or the music I was listening to. Like there is some sort of through line to the kind of experience you can have as a child, and then getting back there as an adult, just to this very primal state. So I think, you know, in writing this piece and kind of grappling with parts and little artifacts of my childhood that I'd found, you know, when I was still a Phillies fan, it felt like a connection to that former self and made me feel a little bit closer to her maybe than I realized that I was.
I'm intrigued with this idea of heartbreak, and I don't know when it started to occur to me that when I said I wanted a picture of you, Miranda, with Marcus Smart, is I actually want you to have like a physical relationship with Marcus Smart. That was the impulse beneath that. But heartbreak is something that I use, you know, you can be heartbroken about a lot of things, but I think of it as a primal sort of romantic issue. And sports obviously is a physical thing, but it's a surrogate for all kinds of physical things. And I wanted to circle back to this idea of heartbreak in Ross, in your work, both in the piece that you did for Bookforum and in your longer poem about basketball. Heartbreak and this idea of like physical connection, which has can be done in a tender way, but there's also a connection to be had in antagonism, which I feel you explore in your piece. So romance, heartbreak, and violence. Over to you, Ross.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, I'm just I'm so like I'm all love right about that. You know, look, I've had like my nose broken, my face opened up a million times, my teeth knocked out. Like I just am not you know, and I've been in like, you know, whatever, like we get into it.
I mean, you did write about this in the piece.
Yeah, totally.
How many teeth do you have to get broken?
How many do I have? Well, I only have
no, I mean that you evoke this idea that you're being physically threatened and what's going on.
Yeah. But the thing that I always think that there's again, like that's again, I feel like those are like the sort of outlier things of like this practice of tending to one another, which is not always elegant. You know, that's the thing. It's not always elegant. And so I mean, I think about the people who I've played hardest against. I mean, I remember, you know, like when you play against big, strong people, whatever, or clumsy people, it could be that too. But like, I think about playing against big, strong people. I'll never forget playing in a 3-on-3 against this guy who had probably played overseas or something. He was very good, big guy. He was probably a guard. And he was just like, at the time I was very big and I was just finished playing college football, so I was big. And this guy was not as big as me, but he was like one of these like strong fucking people. And I just remember coming out of like a little 3-on-3 tournament with a black eye, you know, and like, it's just like, it wasn't a big deal. We had just been playing very hard, but it wasn't, I would never call that violence, you know? It didn't strike me as violence. Violence happens on courts, of course. And I've been the recipient and I've done it, but that feels like actually more outside of this other thing, which is like when you play very hard, which I think of as actually an attempt to elicit the most beautiful thing from each other. Sometimes you do, like, you know, you lose a couple teeth or you break your nose. I kind of like, I'd be curious to have a tussle about that, but I kind of fundamentally refuse the idea that that's violence.
No, I think that's a beautiful distinction, that there's violent contact, or, you know, force bumping into one another hard enough that you'd be seriously bruised or injured in some way, but that is not violence. That's within the game, and that's its own space. And I actually you've just provoked me to remember this bizarre episode in my life when I was traveling and I had time to myself, and I got into almost a day-long run on playing pickup basketball. And this other guy, at one point in the whole thing, I scratched him on the head. Some nail must have caught him, and he had some kind of like stigmata between his eyes, and I was apologizing profusely. And he just kept saying, no, it's ball, that's ball. And I thought that you brought that to mind, because if you hit somebody in the face hard enough that there's a bloody spot between their eyebrows, you could define that as violence. But I think you're also right that there's some cathedral-like enclosure within which it's a different thing.
Yeah, and it's like, also, of course, we've been on courts where you do that and then it does come close to something, or maybe it turns into something. But it gets, I mean, there's ways that stuff is being worked out. And I think for the most part, my experience has been, you know, and I talk about like the kind of threat, because that's sometimes what happens. Like there's the threat, and sometimes the threat is performative, and sometimes the threat is like a promise. But for the most part, it feels like it's trying to actually regulate how we're going to be together, you know. And sometimes like, yo, man, take care of your elbows or else something's going to happen, you know, like, because I got elbows too.
Yeah.
Which is not, to me, that is like, it's a way of, you know, I know. Like a little bit, I hear myself and I'm like, do I sound like a fucking idiot? But I also am like, no. I feel like it's a way that we're like, hey, we need to share this space together, and you actually might hurt me, and I really want to be in this space with you. So let's pull our elbows together a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Well, let me take that idea of sharing space and go to our bureau chief of Celtics, the Celtics fan bureau chief here, because to shift to the terms of being a viewer, a fan, you know, I want to call it Boston Garden. It's now TD Garden, but the environment in which the Celtics play home games is famous, legendary for its the hostility of the fans, a level of hostility that is probably unmatched, although perhaps Philadelphia might be right there. But what are your thoughts about interpersonal violence? You talked about being at these games, you know. Obviously, you guys are all rooting for the same team, although people will always show up. This has become more and more of a thing in sports culture, where fans will travel with the opposing team's jersey and sit amidst the home team. And if their team is doing well, the TV will feature these people jumping up and down in whatever Sixers jerseys in Boston or whatever it is. But I want to hear a report from you, Miranda, about what being a Celtics game is like, along the terms that Ross is discussing, where you have issues of violence, but there's a sort of sanctity to the whole situation. But of course, he's talking about the players, and once you're talking in the stands, there's another layer of atmosphere to deal with.
Yeah, I do just quickly want to speak to something that, sort of building off what Ross is saying about like the sort of care that is the counterpart to the potential violence that happens on the basketball court. Because I think one of the things that I really admire about the style of defense that someone like Marcus Smart, who's a smaller guard, has to play, is that he has to know the opponent's body and be able to predict where that body is going to go. There's just so much tenderness and so much knowledge that goes into trying to defend someone, that goes into, like, you know, doing like just one-on-one coverage on someone and trying to prevent them from shooting the ball in the way that they want to. And yeah, I think that there's something almost romantic about it, which is not to put any kind of like actual romance narrative onto the basketball court, but I think that there's something inherently romantic about that. I would not call TD Garden an inherently romantic space. I love seeing basketball there. I love seeing basketball there. I love seeing basketball live, period. I do love the Boston Celtics. Boston sports fans are a group that I don't necessarily love being a part of all of the time. We don't have a great reputation, and that is for reasons that's earned. And there are some very, very ugly there's a very ugly history there. I think at its very best, what it feels like is an emotional experience that is being shared in the best way. You are experiencing joy, and you are experiencing heartbreak, and that is also a kind of joy because you're experiencing it collectively. And I went to a game in the first half of the season when the Celtics were absolutely just not together as a team. They were doing this thing where they'd forget that they had 5 minutes of basketball to play, and they were playing the Trailblazers, who happened to be my like Western Conference team. I really love them as well. And they were playing a Damian Lillard-less Trailblazers team, and they were up by like, I don't know, 10 or 12. And then they were like, oh, it's 5 minutes. We got 5 minutes in the fourth quarter. I think we're fine. We can stop. And the Blazers won by 1. Anthony Simons, who's a really exciting player that I like a lot, he took them back, and there was like a pall in the arena, just like just people were depressed. But there was a beauty to that too, to that feeling of like, collectively we tried, and collectively we cared about something really, really intensely, and we cheered, and we tried to urge our players to play their best, and it didn't work. And I felt that way. I did not see any of the finals games at TD Garden, but I felt that way, talking with my friends who watched, texting with my friends that I was watching the games, or just having like honestly, like hours long, like I would go on walks with my friends, like after we would lose a game, we would go on a walk and just like commiserate about all of the mistakes that our like beloved players had made. And I think, again, in its best form, what it is caring about a team and about a set of players, and wanting them to be the best versions of themselves. And that's the kind of fan that I want to be. Not the kind of fan who gets mad because someone has like done something wrong, or has disappointed me, because like fundamentally they don't owe me anything. I care about them, and I want them to do this thing that they are so good at and that they love to the best of their ability. But that's not always the vibe at the Garden. Like, let's be honest.
Yeah,
that's not always
this is
the vibe
so
at the
interesting,
Garden.
though, to hear the way that you are articulating your connection. And I'm hearing again, or choosing to focus on almost amorous or romantic language, the discussion of love, evoking that. I must say this, Lindsay, puts me back into the space that you wrote about, because it seems to me that your piece, for all of its, discussion of childhood, is a kind of like giant infidelity. And I wanted to ask how this plays out, and your thoughts about these issues of allegiance, since after all, you went from one team that you loved to a new love.
It did. It is an infidelity for sure. And still have a former coworker who is a Phillies fan, who barely wants to speak to me about baseball and is so betrayed. But yeah, I think, and in some ways I'm very glad that I wrote this essay, because it is something that you know, people have asked me for so long of like, how could you, how can you reconcile these parts of your identity? And I at least, you know, want to attempt to explain. But yeah, I mean, I think something else that I, you know, was thinking about with, and I think this is somewhat related to the question, maybe not entirely, but you know, Miranda, you were in your piece, you talk about how, you know, watching Marcus Smart, like we're both talking about being women who are watching men play sports in these very, you know, environments with specific masculine values, and kind of going back to what, you know, you guys were saying about the pickup courts too, that there is this sort of performance of masculinity and the game and the rules that are set and things like that. And I do think it's interesting that our two pieces are about, in some sense, like not very indirectly, about being women watching men play sports. And there is something, you know, I think you talk, Miranda, about the idea of being aware of your body, but in social space, and how, you know, to watch athletes play, particularly basketball, and as you're talking about anticipating, you know, the person you're guarding and stuff like that, that there is like an awareness that you're seeing men pay to their bodies that we don't often see in society. And I find that really interesting too. And I think it is something, you know, is I've definitely had the experience of like not being given the benefit of the doubt that I know what I'm talking about with both sports and music, which is the main beat that I cover for the most part too. And there's kind of a similar like switch that I've seen go off when I'm actually like saying something that proves I'm making sense and paying attention to a particular team. That's like, oh, okay. And so I found that interesting and kind of wanted to bring that idea too, of, you know, not just of specifically women watching men, but like the performance of masculinity and how that is, you know, varies from sport to sport, but there is a through line in a lot of it, you know, and just the idea of you sort of imagining this scene in the locker room and stuff, and that being a space that, you know, we would not have access to, and there is a lot of projection in that sense too. But you know, that's just something I think about a lot. And I think that it's particularly with like other women friends of mine that follow sports, that follow basketball or baseball and basketball and everything, like I've found a particular kind of camaraderie, I think, in those relationships.
Apologies. I was just scanning some questions that have come in that are really good. And I wanted to encourage those of you watching this, if you have any, now is a good time to put them in. And the first one is right back to you, Lindsay, and I think it's quite interesting. Jen from Brooklyn writes, as a music critic, you often write about fans and their connection to the artist. I'm wondering what overlaps and differences you see in music fandom and sports fandom.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and something that, again, there's a lot more that I wanted to get into this piece, and I found when I just started writing about the Mets, I had more than enough to say. But you know, that's certainly something, and I think a big thing in, you know, the last 10 or 15 years of like the beat that I cover of particularly popular music, that this idea of the stan has become all encompassing. The diehard fan that is going to, if you write anything critical about their beloved artist, they're gonna come for you on Twitter. They're gonna, you know, make your life hell. And the idea of the stan as this like unquestioning, like my fave can do no wrong. The artist that I'm standing, like I support them unconditionally. And, you know, I was thinking when I wrote this piece of just both similarities and differences with, you music fandom and sports fandom. And I think one, the larger analog, I think, is with the team rather than the individual player, because like this kind of goes back to something Miranda was speaking about too, that like this idea that you could fall in love with Marcus Smart and then there's constant discussions about him being traded, or there's the constant possibility that he could not only not be on your team anymore, but he could be playing for a rival and you'd have to decide whether you're rooting for this individual or the team itself. And I think that's something that's very particular about sports fandom, is like I think some people are able to kind of just take the bird's eye view and be, I forget the phrase, that indifferent fans or something like that. But there is that specific tension between the individual and the collective, and that is never quite resolved. And like, even now, as I'm like, the Mets are going to be in the postseason, I'm very excited to see my fave Jacob deGrom pitch. But his contract is up at the end of this year. And as I'm like rooting for him and so excited to watch him, there's this fear in the back of my mind that this could be his last season as a Met. And you're constantly, I think that's where that ever-present idea of heartbreak comes back into. Like, you're always sort of on this edge of losing not only the game, but the player, and losing them to injury, losing them to retirement, or God forbid, a trade. So there's just like a constant situation of precariousness that I think like adds this emotional level to it, and makes it a little different from, being a fan of an author or a musician or something. Like, there's going to be some sort of stability of their output, I think, and it's just, everything's a little bit more precarious when it comes to sports.
Yeah. I want to also add, it's a very interesting thing to distinguish the feelings that fans have for individual athletes that are part of a team, and then for the team. They can be devoted to the team forever. But for example, I can't think of a music situation where you have a Marcus Smart person who's sort of no, yes, and who could satisfy you or totally disappoint you at any given moment, and you're willing, and with that as a prologue, one of these questions I'd like to put it to you, Miranda, who you didn't realize you were taking over as this new, I called you the bureau chief of the Celtics, but really, let's break it. It's Marcus, you're on the Marcus Smart beat. But the question I'd like to put to you comes from a non-placed interlocutor saying, I feel like I rarely hear conversations that align both the experience of watching sports and the experience of playing sports. It feels like they're two different worlds. Would you agree with that? And if yes, why do you think that is? You have to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a tough one for me to answer, because I'm not someone who has played a lot of sports. I grew up in California, so like, as is required by law, I played 1 year of soccer as an elementary school student. But I am a runner. I'm actually supposed to run a marathon on Sunday. So everyone cross your fingers for me, please. And I think one of the things that is interesting about the difference between, I think sometimes about the difference between like a solo sport like running and a team sport like basketball, and the ways in which also sometimes on the court, when things are going poorly, when a team is not gelling, the players seem to me very lonely. But I wonder if someone who has more experience playing sports might want to jump in about the ways in which these experiences, or writing about these experiences, might align, because my experience is so limited.
Well, Ross, that might be you, but I want to then say or add that there's another sort of third dimension between playing and watching, which would be coaching. And you touch on that. So I'll let you run with this if you wish.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I coached for a little while, probably like a decade. And we coached good kids, like big kids, high school kids. And there are all these things like, Miranda, you're noting these things that are so beautiful, like that are also like sort of complications of this idea of like masculinity. Because you make a great point that one of the things that good basketball players do is they know the body of who they're playing with intimately. They know that body in the past, and they know that body into the future. So it's a kind of like, it's profoundly intimate, and to be able to anticipate what your partner in the game or, adversary, but whatever the person you're playing with, I say, is going to do is just profoundly, it's intense and it's beautiful, and it complicates an idea of the masculine, a sort of a regular normative idea of the masculine. Watching and to have that thing of being like someone who's been in the game as a player and then as a coach. So, a lot of the instructing and a lot of the, you're watching for all these things. I think there is something really, really interesting about it. And I think partly like one of the things that's interesting to me about it is that I almost have never, three things: player, coach, admirer. I'm almost never like, I get so frustrated, or my feelings get hurt when I hear people who don't know the game, like talking shit about players. I'm like, this is a hard thing to do. This is a really hard thing to do. You think this person is not trying as hard, like this is very hard. And so it sort of brings like another level, I think, maybe of like tenderness to the experience of watching, because I know a little bit, or maybe a lot of bit, about what it feels like to like try to make my body do these things that these people do. And I'm like, how the fuck do you do that? And I also know the experience of trying to coach and sometimes making it happen. These younger people who now are older than the people who, if I'm watching professional basketball, the kids that I coach are now like the age of like the oldest of these people probably. And it is really sort of, it really softens my heart, and it makes me profoundly curious. Like, like when someone's not, like Ben Simmons, I'm curious about Ben Simmons. I hope he's okay. That's what I hope, or James Harden, like, I'm just really interested in this guy. He's an amazing player. And like, and I'm just curious about like, okay, at the end of the season, like something, what's happening with this? And when people kind of shit on Harden, I'm like, are you fucking kidding? Are you fucking kidding? Like, maybe it's something too about being outside of this other realm of the game, which is like, winning is that, whatever. That's like what, they're paid to do, I guess. But there's this other thing that these people are doing, which is like being in this kind of wild realm of beauty and trying to make these incredibly beautiful things, which you can do without winning a championship. You can change the game fundamentally forevermore without winning a championship. And you can, the other thing, like I write a little bit about music too in this book, the best simile I have in this book, and see if this catches anyone. I'm describing the face Dionne Warwick makes at the 1988 NAACP Awards when Luther Vandross is covering her song, A House Is Not a Home. And I say that face that she makes is like Gary Payton, 80s and 90s guard for the Sonics, makes when he gets crossed over by Jay Williams, also known as White Chocolate. That they make the same face. I think there's gonna be 8 people who catch that simile, but it's kind of like, the other thing is that there are these realms of influence that are happening that I think as a player and a coach and an admirer, you can kind of see. You can kind of be like, oh, we're gonna be doing, kids are gonna be doing that in 20 years, That's my 2 cents.
Or 20 minutes. Can I come back to the thing that you just threw at us? Because I'm intrigued. Just this minor point. When you met, I can't reference the Dionne Warwick face, but I just assumed it was ecstasy. And I assumed Gary Payton getting beat by Jason Williams was agony. But can you set me straight on what we're talking about?
Yeah, no, the feeling that I think it is, it's like when you play with someone and you're better than them, and then they do something to you that you're supposed to do to them, and you're like, this motherfucker. I call it this motherfucker. That's the face. Like, You know,
How does Dionne Warwick's face figure into this? This is what I'm trying to figure out.
because Luther Vandross is covering her song, and he's doing it in a way that it's her song. It's really her song.
Oh.
And he covers it in a way that's like, everyone is, you know,
Loves
is
it.
what in the world are you doing?
Oh.
This is so beautiful.
Oh, okay. So it's,
beyond comprehension.
but, so I'm sorry. So are you suggesting that Gary Payton is not merely disgusted, that there's an element of appreciation in that moment?
I'm saying it's like fuck, and then it's like fuck you. You did a fucking beautiful thing to me. You know, we were beautiful together. That's
Okay.
what, you know, like when you get burnt, sometimes you're like, fuck, you know.
I'm going to try to hold on to that the next time I get abused.
Okay.
I'm going to go, we were beautiful.
We might
together."
have slightly different approaches.
No, I think that's very positive. I love the positivity. And I hope that we were beautiful together can be our collective memory of our gathering and with each other and whoever else is out there. I feel like we've come to a good place, but I want to give any of you guys an opportunity to add any 2 cents. Should you have it, or even 1 cent.
I just want to say it was really fun to talk with you all, and the questions and the whole kind of going back and forth. And I'm grateful for your work, really beautiful work.
I want to hold on to Marcus Smart as a tender defender. And I want to hold on to what I think you just said, Ross. I don't want to mangle the words. You just said them. That's like, that was beautiful what you did to me. What was that? We can't hear you. Hold on. Come back.
Yeah, a little bit of like, yeah, fuck you. That was too beautiful for words. Thank
Okay.
you.
I'm gonna look up this because I feel like I know what I know. I think I know the expression you're talking about,
Yeah.
but Gary Payton is like an obvious Marcus Smart predecessor. I want to look this moment up also because there are many levels, I'm sure, to this expression, but it was a beautiful simile.
Yeah.
And this has been a beautiful experience. Thank you so much for letting me be part of it.
Yes. All right. Well, then, bravo to us. And thank you so much. And nice to be here as well.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in really fast and just offer my thanks. I thank you so much to the participants. I mean, one of the things about these conversations is I have a sense of where they might go, but then they go places that I never could have imagined, and I feel that tonight, and I really appreciate that. So thank you, and thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you to the Brooklyn Book Festival, and thanks to the people at Bookforum who helped put this on. Dave O'Neill, Brian Green, Lizzie Harding, Jennifer Krasinski, Daniel McConnell, and Tony Kerner. And anyone else that I'm leaving out there, thank you. And please subscribe to Bookforum, bookforum.com. And yeah, thanks. That's it. Have a great night, and I hope to see you all soon.
Bye.